Hidden within the folds of history and the forgotten corners of the world are stories that defy explanation, mysterious disappearances, strange rituals, and creepy locations. On this episode, we bring you another 5 strange but true mysteries, each one as unnerving as it is real. A brilliant young man who claimed he could travel to another galaxy. A forest where men's shirts hang eerily from the trees. A haunting trio of mannequins, and more. These are not legends. These are not myths. These are stories backed by names, dates, and facts. So stoke the fire, settle in, and let curiosity take the lead on part 3 of our series of 5 strangest but true mysteries that will blow your mind on Fireside Unsolved. On the morning of November 12th, 1995, in the quiet town of San Bernardino, California, Matthew and Wendy Jameson returned home from church, expecting the usual peace of a Sunday morning. But what they found in their backyard was anything but ordinary. Scattered across the grass were $20 bills. At first, they thought it might be some kind of prank, maybe a neighbor or a friend playing a joke. But as they gathered up the bills, from their yard, their driveway, even some bills that were laying in a few neighboring properties, the reality began to sink in. This wasn't just a handful of money. It was a significant amount. When they counted it all, the total came to $6,500 in cash. But there was no note, no bag, no explanation, no witnesses to anything strange. Just money, seemingly dumped over their house in the middle of the night. Being the honest people that they were, the Jamesons took the money to the police station and reported what had happened. Under California law, the Jamesons were required to place an ad in the local paper, announcing their find. If no one claimed the money within 90 days, it would become theirs. And that's exactly what happened. By March 1st, 1996, the deadline came and went. No one stepped forward, no calls, no questions. The Jamesons were now $6,500 richer and used the money to pay off Wendy's credit cards. But even now, nearly 3 decades later, the mystery remains. Where the money came from and why it was tossed into their backyard is anyone's guess. According to Wendy, it was only later that they found out they weren't the only ones who made a strange discovery that day. Some of their neighbors later admitted to the Jamesons that they'd found cash too, but quietly collected it earlier that morning, long before the Jamesons had returned home from church. And that's the story of the Jamesons and the mysterious cash. Cash that was literally dropped on their house. Mysterious cash that was never claimed and may never be solved. In the farmlands of Bennington, Nebraska, where the roads stretch endlessly across fields of corn, something strange has been unfolding, something that has shaken even the most level-headed residents of this rural community. It all started late one evening in November of 2024, when a man named Kyle Sorensen was driving along with his wife on Highway 36 in Bennington. Suddenly, out of nowhere, his headlights caught something in the middle of the pavement, a child's bike. He didn't have time to swerve. The impact jolted him. His tires screeched. His car came to a grinding halt. Dazed but unhurt, Kyle checked his mirrors and saw that someone was there checking on them. Someone that was somehow already standing behind him. A man who seemed to appear from nowhere walked up to Kyle's car, calm and collected, and simply said, "Just checking to make sure you're okay." And then, just as quietly as he'd arrived, he disappeared back into the night. But Kyle's wife swore she saw something else that night. The same mysterious man pouring oil, or something looking like it, onto the road nearby. Then it happened again. A man by the name of Garrison Beach and his wife Skylar were driving the same highway when a large piece of metal appeared, suddenly, in the middle of the road. Garrison swerved, missing the piece of metal but sending their car into a ravine. Shaken but alive, they climbed out of their wrecked car, only to find a man already waiting for them at the top of the embankment. His car was there and the headlights were on. He said he had called the police. Garrison told local news. "As soon as we got out of the car, I remember walking up the embankment and this guy showed up. He was already there, waiting for us up on the side of the road and said, 'Are you guys okay? I've called the paramedics already.'" His wife, Skylar Beach, said, "It was just very odd. As soon as we said, no, we're going to wait for the police, he kind of just walked back to his car." More reports started to come in, multiple people describing a mysterious man appearing at accident scenes, often before first responders. Each crash seemed to involve random debris or objects mysteriously left in the road, bike parts, metal, trash, always on Highway 36, always involving this unexplained man, and local police confirmed it. Sheriff Aaron Hansen of the Douglas County Sheriff's Office said they've received multiple calls about similar incidents and have even identified a person of interest. But so far, no arrest, no confirmed sightings, and no one knows who this man really is. Is he a local man, a good Samaritan, or a disturbed individual causing accidents just to play savior, or even something far more sinister? Whatever the truth is, one thing is certain. There's a mysterious man lurking on Highway 36 in Nebraska. Granger Ormond Taylor was born on October 7, 1948, on Vancouver Island, British Columbia. From an early age, his life was touched by tragedy when his father drowned in a tragic accident near the family's lakeside cabin, when Granger was still a young boy. Granger dropped out of school around 8th grade, uninterested in traditional education. What he lacked in formal training, he more than made up for in raw, mechanical brilliance. Granger had an uncanny ability to fix, well, almost anything. Old engines, rusted-out tractors, one-cylinder cars. He could take them apart, study them, and bring them roaring back to life. By the time he was a teenager, he had rebuilt a working bulldozer. Later, he dragged an abandoned steam locomotive from the wilderness and restored it piece by piece. Today, that very locomotive sits on display at the British Columbia Forest Discovery Center. And perhaps most impressively, he painstakingly restored a World War II P-40 Kitty Hawk fighter plane, an incredible achievement that earned him tens of thousands of dollars from a collector. Some called him eccentric. Others believed he saw the world in ways the rest of us simply couldn't. That brings us to the cold evening of November 29, 1980, when something truly bizarre happened in the quiet town of Duncan, British Columbia. Granger's parents found a note at their home in Granger's own handwriting. The message read, "Dear Mother and Father, I have gone away to walk aboard an alien spaceship, as recurring dreams assured a 42-month interstellar voyage to explore the vast universe, then return. I am leaving behind all my possessions to you, as I will no longer require the use of any. Please use the instructions in my will as a guide to help. Love, Granger." Police launched an immediate search but came up empty, and while his family and friends were panicking to find Granger, deep down they knew that his disappearance wasn't entirely unexpected. You see, Granger Taylor had an obsession with space and extraterrestrial life. About a month before he disappeared, Granger told a friend that he was in direct communication with beings from another galaxy. One of his close friends later said, he did have dreams that they were coming to get him. Friends and family recalled that by the late 1970s, and leading up to him going missing, Granger's obsession with extraterrestrials had reached new heights, to the point that one day he made an announcement. He was going to build a spaceship. Using scrap metal, satellite dishes, and whatever he could scavenge from the local dump, Granger welded together a life-sized replica of a flying saucer right in his parents' backyard. Inside, he placed a couch, a television set, and even a small wood-burning stove. He would spend hours sitting inside, thinking, dreaming, sometimes sleeping, trying to figure out how these otherworldly machines might actually work. A letter written by Granger's cousin to Granger's mother details that his friends had accepted his beliefs about space travel, aliens, and leaving Earth, because he seemed so matter-of-fact about it. Nearly 6 years passed, and Granger had not been found or heard from, nothing at all, until 1986. In March 1986, a group of forestry workers stumbled upon a blast site deep in the forest near Mount Prevost, not far from the Taylor family home. Scattered among the debris were human bone fragments, and what was left of a vehicle, a bright pink Datsun truck, the same make and color vehicle that Granger drove. The Montreal Gazette reported that the Royal Canadian Mounted Police confirmed the remains were Granger's. Evidence at the scene indicated that explosives, most likely dynamite, had caused the blast. Granger had access to dynamite and used it often to clear stumps from farmland, a common practice at the time. The coroner's report concluded Granger Taylor died as the result of an explosion that he set off, and he had died that night in 1980, the same night he left behind his letter to his parents. Except, not everyone agrees with that version of events. Granger's longtime friend Robert Keller had seen him handle explosives countless times. He was cautious. He was smart. I don't believe he blew himself up. Just before we built the spaceship, he told me if he ever wanted to disappear, all he had to do was grow a beard and move to another country. No one would ever find him. 42 months after his disappearance, just as Granger's note had promised, friends and family waited and watched the skies for a return that never came. The mystery is still out there. Was it an accident? Or Did Granger Taylor really walk away from this world, just as he said he would, to board a ship and explore the stars? No one knows for sure. Shirtwood Forest, as it has come to be called, is a peculiar and unnerving patch of swampy woods just off Route 70 in the small town of Brick, New Jersey. To the casual observer, it might seem like any other stretch of woodland, but it holds a bizarre and creepy secret. For years, something strange has been unfolding in this patch of forest, an unsettling collection of men's white dress shirts. These shirts are found hanging from the branches of trees at an unnervingly high height, sometimes 20 feet off the ground. No one knows why. No one has been able to explain who hung them or their purpose. The sheer randomness and the weird image of the shirts fluttering in the wind against the backdrop of the swampy, secluded forest seem to take on a life of their own. The most infamous incident at the location occurred on October 17, 1999, when 17 white dress shirts were discovered hanging eerily from the trees. The mystery only deepened when, 12 days later, on October 29th, 12 more shirts were found in the same area. In total, 29 shirts hung from the trees in this strange and isolated corner of the woods. But that wasn't all. Laying at the base of one tree was a bird with a broken neck, adding yet another bizarre detail to the scene. Is it some sort of ritual or message? Could it be the work of a prankster or someone with a strange obsession? Despite numerous attempts by locals and law enforcement to get to the bottom of the mystery, no one has ever come forward with a reasonable explanation. No one has been able to identify the person or persons responsible for hanging the shirts, nor has anyone come close to understanding the deeper meaning, if there is one. The village of New Hamburg, New York, is the epitome of a quaint historic area. Located about 80 miles north of New York City, New Hamburg offers a stark contrast to the bustling streets and modern buildings of the city. It's a place where time seems to slow down, and history is deeply rooted in the landscape. One of the oldest homes in New Hamburg is the Lawson House, a historic property that was built in 1845 by John Lawson, a descendant of one of the earliest families to settle in the area. This house, located on Main Street, stands as a testament to the village's long history. As a piece of New Hamburg's heritage, the John Lawson House was preserved over the years, passing through the hands of several families. However, in the 20th and 21st centuries, something strange began to occur on the front porch of the house. For more than a decade, 3 life-sized female mannequins mysteriously appeared on the porch. These mannequins, similar to those found in department stores, were dressed in various vintage outfits, accessorized with items such as long white gloves, an empty birdcage, books, toolboxes, and even a plastic milk jug filled with potpourri. The mannequins were often seen sitting in different positions, and their outfits and accessories would change over time. There was no explanation for why they appeared, nor did anyone ever see a person moving them or setting up the mannequins. Even more bizarre, the mannequins would disappear during inclement weather and reappear when the weather cleared. This eerie cycle continued for years, and the origin and purpose of the mannequins remained a mystery. People who passed by the John Lawson house couldn't help but feel an unsettling energy surrounding the mannequins. In 2016, the mannequins disappeared without a trace, and based on property records, it coincided with the sale of the house to new owners. No one saw them being moved or removed from the property, and since their disappearance, they have not been seen again. Whether the mannequins were an artistic statement, an eccentric decoration, or something more paranormal, their unsettling presence was another part of the house's legacy, forever intertwined with the long and eerie history of the John Lawson house. Across the centuries, hidden in crumbling libraries, locked away in private collections, and buried beneath shifting sands, there exist books, scrolls, and documents that seem to defy explanation. Some were created to warn of omens, others to unlock the secrets of nature and the soul, and still others to preserve entire civilizations on the edge of collapse. On this episode, we'll explore 5 of the most fascinating and mysterious works ever created. First, we'll look at the Prodigiorum ac Ostentorum Chronicon, a dark catalog of omens and horror. Next, we unravel the Ripley Scroll, a surreal alchemical map to the legendary Philosopher's Stone. Then we confront the undeciphered text of the Rohank Codex, a book no one can read, and filled with images from a forgotten and eerie world. After the Rohank Codex, we'll look at the Greek magical papyri, which includes ancient spells and rituals calling out to gods and spirits from beyond the grave. And finally, step into the lost world, preserved in the shimmering pages of the Codex Mendoza, a vibrant and resilient portrait of the mighty Aztec Empire, captured at the moment of its fall. Each of these mysterious creations offers a glimpse into the fears, hopes, and dreams of those who came before us. And even now, they continue to whisper their secrets to anyone willing to listen. Welcome back to Fireside Unsolved, episode 168, 5 Most Mysterious Documents Ever Discovered. During the Renaissance, a time when the lines between science and superstition often blurred, a remarkable book was created. Published in 1557 by a scholar named Conrad Lycosthenes, entitled Prodigiorum ac Ostentorum Chronicon, or The Chronicle of Portents and Omens, it remains one of the most fascinating and eerie works from that time period. The book is large and filled with disturbing woodcut illustrations. Lycosthenes wrote it to document some of the world's strangest and most mysterious events, stretching all the way from ancient history up to his own lifetime. Inside, readers would find stories about the births of monsters, fiery comets racing across the sky, bizarre sea creatures, and devastating natural disasters, all carefully gathered from ancient texts, medieval records, and first-hand accounts. But this wasn't just a collection of ancient mysteries. In Lycosthenes' time, the world was suffering from plagues, wars, and religious conflicts. People didn't think strange events happened by chance. They believed they were messages from a higher power, warning signs meant to guide humanity in the right direction. Lycosthenes saw his book as a chronicle, an attempt to create a map of omens, a guide for interpreting the unsettling signs that seemed to show up everywhere, a way for people to read these signs and try to understand what they meant. However, the book's illustrations surely have the most impact to the reader. Rivers flowing with blood, spectral figures in the night sky, two-headed animals, and other disturbing creatures. These images stuck in people's minds and etched themselves into the imagination of Europe as a whole. Prodigiorum ac Ostentorum Chronicon shaped European art, culture, fears, and a fascination with both monsters and miracles for generations. It shows a time when the world wasn't seen through scientific fact, but instead as a living book, where every strange event could be a message from the universe. Even now, nearly 500 years later, flipping through its pages feels less like reading a historic document and more like stepping into a world where every page could be hiding a secret, carrying a voice from beyond. While Conrad Lycosthenes was mapping the world's strangest phenomena, another mystery was unfolding: the search for the Philosopher's Stone. Among the most fascinating and mysterious objects connected to this ancient quest is the Ripley Scroll. Named after the 15th century English alchemist George Ripley, though it was likely created after his time, the Ripley Scroll is more than just a manuscript. It's a visual puzzle full of symbolism. There are just 23 versions of the Ripley Scroll that still exist today, each one hand-painted and unique. Some versions of the scroll stretch over 18 feet long and are filled with strange images: dragons eating themselves, mythical creatures, orbs, and alchemical glassware bubbling with mystical smoke. Rather than offering a clear step-by-step guide to create the Philosopher's Stone, the scroll is an allegory, a symbolic map of the process needed to create the Philosopher's Stone, the legendary substance that could supposedly grant immortality and turn common metals into gold. To understand the meaning of the scroll's images requires knowledge of both alchemy and its deeper philosophies, ideas like purification, death, rebirth, and spiritual enlightenment. This suggests it was an important guide, made only for the most serious alchemist practitioners, and no two versions are exactly the same. In fact, historians and scholars still debate what the vivid, dreamlike scenes truly mean. Looking at the Ripley Scroll is like stepping into the mind of a true alchemist, where science and mysticism come together. It's a world where transformation is not just about changing metals, but about changing the soul itself. Some mysteries are fascinating because of what they reveal, but others, like the Rohank Codex, are intriguing because of what they refuse to give up. Found in Hungary in the early 19th century, the Rohank Codex is an unreadable manuscript filled with over 400 pages of strange writing, a script that has never been deciphered, and a language that no one can identify. The pages of the Codex are also filled with hundreds of illustrations, some peaceful, some violent, depicting battles, crucifixions, and religious ceremonies. Unlike other undeciphered texts, like the Voynich manuscript, the Rohank Codex is written in an unknown alphabet that seems to blend runic characters, elements of Brahmi, and even early European-like symbols, but doesn't match any known language. Linguists, historians, and cryptographers have all tried to decode it, but so far, no one has succeeded. Some believe it's a religious document, while others think it could be a historical record. There's even a theory that it's a 19th century hoax, though no one has been able to prove this either. What makes the Rohank Codex even more mysterious is that we know almost nothing about where it came from. There's no author's name, no historical context, and no references to it outside of the codex itself. Even the name Rohank comes from the town where it was discovered, rather than from any clue within the manuscript. Every attempt to understand it only raises more questions. It could be a codex from a lost civilization, or a secret religious text from medieval Europe, maybe a private language created for reasons we can no longer understand. Or it's ultimately a riddle that will forever remain unsolvable. Buried for centuries beneath the sands of Egypt, a collection of ancient documents was uncovered that would reveal a hidden world of magic practiced by the ancients. Known as the Greek magical papyri, these fascinating texts date from around the 2nd century to the 5th century, and contain spells, rituals, and incantations written in Greek, Coptic, and Demotic Egyptian. Unlike the neatly organized spellbooks that came later in history, the Greek magical papyri are more chaotic and filled with a wild mix of magic and beliefs. They offer a glimpse into a world where gods, demons, and cosmic forces were summoned, where skilled practitioners could cast spells to call down deities, create love charms, protect themselves from enemies, and unlock hidden knowledge. These fragile, ancient scrolls contain instructions for all kinds of magical practices, invisibility spells, rites to bring people back to life, and ways to communicate with the dead. Some rituals required rare herbs and precious stones, while others involved drawing complex magical symbols or speaking sacred names believed to hold divine power. What makes the Greek magical papyri remarkable isn't just the content of the spells, but what they reveal about the ancient world's spiritual beliefs. They show how Greek, Egyptian, and early Christian traditions blended together. In this world, the lines between religion, science, and magic were blurry, and invoking a secret word or name could change the course of destiny. Today, these papyri are not only invaluable historical treasures, but they're also a window into a hidden system of belief that once thrived in the classical world. After the fall of an empire, when the echoes of its existence begin to fade, sometimes a single document can preserve a world that might otherwise be lost to time. Such is the case with the Codex Mendoza, a remarkable 16th century manuscript that provides a rare, vibrant glimpse into the Aztec Empire, just as it was on the edge of destruction. Commissioned around 1541 by Antonio de Mendoza, the first viceroy of New Spain, the Codex was created to inform the Spanish crown about the lands, people, and resources under their control. Written by Aztec scribes skilled in their traditional pictographic style but influenced by European formats, the Codex Mendoza is a unique blend. It's part tribute list, part history book, and part cultural survival manual. Its pages come alive with color and detail. Vivid depictions of Aztec rulers and warriors, records of tributes collected from conquered cities, and illustrations of daily life, religious ceremonies, battles, and punishments. Even the founding of the great city of Tenochtitlan is immortalized, with an eagle perched on a cactus, the symbol now proudly featured on Mexico's national flag. But the Codex Mendoza is more than just a historical document. Though it was written with the Spanish crown in mind, it also preserves an indigenous worldview on the brink of being wiped out. The pictographs contain meanings that go beyond the Spanish translations beside them, symbols of a culture, a belief system, and a sacred order that the conquerors could never fully comprehend. The journey of the Codex Mendoza is a whole other story that only adds to its intrigue. Originally destined for Spain, the ship carrying it was seized by French pirates. The manuscript wandered through Europe for centuries before finally finding a home at the Bodleian Library in Oxford, where it still remains to this day. Not all forests are just trees. Across the globe, there are places where the forest just feels off, where the air feels denser, where paths twist in ways they shouldn't, and where the silence isn't peaceful. It's unnerving. These are the forests that don't just hold stories. They swallow them. Enter if you like, but don't expect them to let go easily. Welcome back to Fireside Unsolved, 5 most mysterious forests in history. Tucked away in the hills of Brown County, Indiana, Yellowwood State Forest stretches across 25,000 acres of shadowy woods and winding trails. It's easy to overlook, especially next to the better-known Brown County State Park, but Yellowwood has its own secrets and legends that make it unforgettable in its own right. The name of the forest comes from its namesake, the yellowwood tree, which is rarely found to grow as far north as Indiana. As if to remind visitors that this forest follows its own strange rhythm, the tree only blooms here once every few years. And of the 25,000 acres in the forest, only 200 of these acres hold these trees. Built during the Great Depression, Yellowwood still bears the fingerprints of the government agencies that established the forest. Their stonework and cabins remain, weathered but standing, relics of a different time. But even history can't explain what's happening in the trees in the forest, and not just the yellowwood trees. Something, or someone, is putting massive rocks in them. In 1998, rangers first discovered an 80-foot chestnut oak holding a sandstone boulder, estimated to be the size of a refrigerator, in its upper branches. Locals named it Gobbler's Rock. Then a summer storm snapped the tree. It crashed to the ground, taking the boulder down with it. You'd think that would be the end of it, but you would be wrong. 5 miles away, 2 more sandstone boulders, each weighing about 200 pounds, were spotted lodged high in the forked limbs of sycamore trees. Not fallen, not resting. Instead, they were wedged between branches, as if they were deliberately placed. Then forest manager Jim Allen later admitted he'd found at least 6 more in the area. At first, it was thought that tornadoes had thrown the boulders, and by chance they landed in the trees. But as more rocks appeared in more trees, that theory unraveled. The new hypothesis is that someone is climbing the trees, using ropes and pulleys to hoist these stones up. But who would do this, and why would they do it? Rumors continue to swirl. College pranksters, ancient civilizations, even extraterrestrials. But no one has gotten any closer to figuring out the mystery. The stones are just there, sitting in silence, watching from above. Deep in the Latvian countryside, hidden beneath thick canopies of pine and birch, sits Pokaini Forest, a place that feels uncomfortably aware of your presence. The air is still, the silence deafening, and scattered through the woods are hundreds of stone piles, some neat and deliberate, others oddly chaotic. No one knows exactly why they're there. Some say the stones were meant for a castle that was never built, a grand plan abandoned and forgotten by history. Others suggest they were cleared from farmland, dragged into the woods by farmers long gone. Some believe Pokaini is a sacred place, an ancient pagan ground, its stones humming and vibrating with energy. Psychics, mystics, and curious wanderers still visit the forest, placing offerings on the rocks to charge them. A coin, a feather, a lock of hair, each left behind in hopes of a blessing or protection. Because not everyone leaves the forest unscathed. There are darker stories too, like sudden illnesses and nightmares that follow visitors home and into their dreams. People who take stones from Pokaini suffer strange misfortunes, deaths, or just straight up go mad. The forest doesn't like to be disturbed. It watches. It remembers. Locals believe the stones are markers for something older than memory, a buried network of ancient energy, or even a doorway to another world. Whatever the truth may be, Pokaini Forest remains untouched by time, just like its secrets. At the edge of London, where the noise and lights begin to fade, Epping Forest stretches like a living relic. 5,900 acres of ancient woodland lying between the River Lee and River Roding. The forest has been wooded since the Neolithic era. You can still find the raised earthworks of 2 Iron Age forts, Loughton Camp and Ambrosbury Banks, deep in the trees. And being that Epping Forest is London's largest forest, it was once royal ground. The king's deer ran free here, and only the monarch had the right to hunt. But it was also common land, used by local villagers who grazed their animals and gathered timber. Locals call it the Cockney Paradise, but the name doesn't quite fit. There's something darker and more secretive than joyful about this place. The forest isn't just preserving history, it also hides it. By the turn of the 18th century, Epping Forest already had a bad reputation. Highwaymen like Dick Turpin and Tom King used its cover to vanish after robbing wealthy travelers, and Turpin even had a hideout here. The forest was a stage for ambushes and escapes, lit only by lanterns and the flash from their pistols. But the violence didn't fade with time. If anything, it evolved. Over the decades, Epping Forest became a dumping ground for secrets too dark for the city to stomach. It is now infamous not just as a place of myth and mischief, but as a graveyard for the murdered. These are not old stories. They're part of recent, brutal history. In 1966, 15-year-old Marion Hartley was dragged into the woods after a school dance. She never came out. In 1970, Susan Blatchford and Gary Hanlon, two children from nearby Enfield, vanished without a trace. Their bodies were later found in the forest, laid to rest beneath its ancient trees. By 1981, a new mystery emerged: the decomposed body of a man, dressed with care, a money belt strapped around his waist, filled with English and Spanish currency. No name. In 1989, accountant Terrence Gooderham and his girlfriend Maxine Arnold were found shot dead, execution style, in what many believe was a professional hit. The following year, a woman named Patricia Parsons was discovered slumped in her car, and a crossbow bolt in her skull. In 2000, Wendy Woodhouse was tortured and beaten to death. Her killers claimed revenge over a soured drug deal. By 2003, the forest had grown quieter, but no less grim. A body was found, so decomposed experts couldn't even determine the gender of the remains. It had likely been there, undisturbed, for at least 2 decades. In 2004, the skeleton of Ivor Willis appeared in the forest after 2 years missing. The forest had given him back, but no explanation for his death came with his body. Then came 2005. A man by the name of Shah Afrouj Ali was stabbed and set on fire by his lover and her brother. That same year, gunshots echoed in the forest, and a man was found with bullet wounds to the head. He died in hospital, and no arrests were made. And in 2015, the forest claimed another, Hidir Aksakal, whose body was discovered near the Hollow Pond section of the park. Epping Forest has proven itself to be more than just thousands of acres of woodlands and nature. It's a boundary between worlds, between London and the wild, between history and the present, between the seen and the buried, between the alive and the dead. And if you stray too far from the path, you may start to wonder how many others did the same, and how many never came back. Locals call it the Bermuda Triangle of Romania. Just west of Cluj-Napoca, tucked behind the Ethnographic Museum of Transylvania, lies a forest that seems to exist on the edge of reality. The Hoia Baciu forest spans just 3 square kilometers, but within its borders, time slips, shadows shift, and people disappear. The forest sits on a ridge flanked by the Samashul Mik and Nadash rivers. Valleys carve through its boundaries: Tayatura Turkuli to the east, Chela Bacului to the northeast, and Bongar to the west. But for all its detail on a map, Hoia Baciu doesn't feel like a place of earth and stone. Its trees are the first thing you notice, bent, gnarled, twisted as if in silent agony. They spiral and arch unnaturally, forming shapes that suggest motion where there is none, like they're frozen mid-reach, mid-scream. There's an eerie stillness here, the kind that makes you feel like someone is about to sneak up behind you. People speak of a subtle but constant feeling of being watched. Footsteps are heard but never matched to a figure. Equipment fails. Compass needles spin. One legend tells of a young girl who vanished into the forest. Search parties found nothing. 5 years later, she walked out, unchanged, unharmed, and completely unaware she'd been gone. Another speaks of a shepherd who entered with his entire flock and was never seen again. No remains, no sound, just nothing. This forest seems to have a way of swallowing people whole. Others claim to have seen orbs of light darting through the trees. There are even reports of alien encounters, strange burns in the grass, and a clearing that nothing seems to grow in. Scientists have studied it. Paranormal investigators have flocked to it. No one has found answers, only more questions. Hoia Baciu doesn't just feel haunted. It feels wrong, as if it doesn't belong entirely to this world. And maybe it doesn't. To the untrained eye, Elfin Forest looks like any other sun-drenched slice of Southern California. 750 acres of twisting trails and peaceful wilderness, southwest of Escondido. Hikers come for the views. Locals come for the calm. But beneath the brush and rock, something feels alive. Most famously, the legend of the White Witch. They say she wanders these hills in grief, searching for her husband and child, both murdered in the forest long ago. Some claim she's looking for their killer. Others believe she's trapped, unable to move on. For a time, she was a common sight around the Harmony Grove Spiritual Center, a local psychic community just northeast of the reserve. The psychics said they saw her often, pale, drifting, heartbroken. Then they say, she found the light. She vanished. But not everyone is convinced. Some nights, hikers report seeing a woman in white standing alone near the trailhead by Escondido Creek. She never speaks. She just watches, then disappears. But her story is only part of the forest's dark vibe. Long before the White Witch, this land belonged to the northern Diegueño and Luiseno peoples. For thousands of years, they gathered here. They carved petroglyphs into the stone, symbols and messages etched in ancient tongues. Some are said to be over 9,000 years old, remnants of the Uyman language, once spoken across the region. Mortars and metates lie buried in the soil. Pictographs still cling to the canyon walls. This was once sacred ground, a gathering place, a place of energy. But now some believe that energy has turned. So what changed? And why does a place once considered peaceful now hum with tension and unease? A single missing person is a tragedy, but when dozens vanish at once, it becomes something darker, something harder to explain. From students seized in the night, to families who simply vanish from their homes, to entire crews swallowed by ice and sea, mass disappearances defy logic and leave behind more questions than answers. On this episode, we explore 5 of the most haunting group vanishings ever recorded. In Mexico, 43 students are taken by force and never seen again. In Nigeria, nearly 300 schoolgirls are kidnapped, sparking a global outcry. In Argentina, a rural family disappears without a trace. In the Arctic, 2 ships and 129 men vanish into the ice, their fates unknown for more than a century. And off the coast of Libya, an entire refugee boat, 243 souls, disappears into thin air. Each story is disturbing. Each story is real. And each reminds us that in a world of GPS, satellites, and surveillance, people can still vanish, together, without a trace. September 26, 2014 was a night like any other in southern Mexico, when a group of 43 students from the Ayotzinapa Rural Teachers College set out on a bus ride that would end in one of the darkest and most confounding disappearances in modern history. The 43 students were headed to Mexico City to honor the anniversary of the 1968 Tlatelolco massacre, a brutal government crackdown on protesting students decades earlier. To get there, they followed a common college tradition, commandeering local buses as student activists had done for years. But something went horribly wrong. As the buses made their way through the city of Iguala, they were stopped at multiple roadblocks by local police. Shots rang out in the darkness. Panic, confusion, and then silence. By the time the sun rose in the morning, all 43 students were missing. At first, officials claimed they had been detained by corrupt municipal police working with a local drug cartel called Guerreros Unidos, who allegedly mistook the students for members of a rival gang. According to this version of events, the students were handed over, murdered, and their bodies incinerated in a massive fire. But that story began to unravel almost immediately. Independent investigators, including a team of international forensic experts, concluded that the mass incineration was scientifically impossible. There was no evidence of such a fire, no remains, no trace of anything. Then came the whispers that the buses may have been carrying illegal substances for a cartel, that the students unknowingly had been involved in something they were never meant to know about, and that the Mexican army, present in the area and monitoring the events, did nothing to stop what was happening. Some reports even suggest the military may have been directly involved. For the families of the missing, hope turned to heartbreak, and then to anger and fury. For years, they demanded answers. Their marches filled city streets. Their faces, holding pictures of their missing children, became symbols of a nation's failure to protect its own people. Under a new administration, a fresh investigation was promised. A truth commission was formed. Arrests were made, including cartel leaders, military personnel, and a former attorney general. But even now, over a decade later, the truth remains buried beneath layers of corruption, fear, and silence. Only 3 of the 43 students have been officially identified. The rest, still missing. It was one of the most ambitious journeys of the 19th century, and one of its most tragic. In 1845, British explorer Sir John Franklin set sail from England with two ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, and a crew of 129 men. Their mission was to complete the final uncharted stretch of the fabled Northwest Passage, a sea route linking the Atlantic and Pacific through the icy waters of the Canadian Arctic. The stakes were high. For Britain, dominating the Northwest Passage meant securing a vital trade route and cementing its maritime supremacy. The expedition also sought to gather scientific data to better understand the Earth's magnetic field, science that could potentially revolutionize navigation. But Franklin and his men never came back. The ships became trapped in thick sea ice in the Victoria Strait, near King William Island, in what is now Nunavut. After more than a year of being icebound, the crew abandoned both vessels in April 1848. By then, at least 24 men, including Franklin himself, had already died. The remaining survivors, led by second-in-command Francis Crozier and Captain James Fitzjames, attempted to march to the Canadian mainland. None were ever seen alive again. What happened after that is still pieced together from fragments. Pushed by mounting public pressure, the British Admiralty launched rescue missions beginning in 1848. Over the next several decades, search expeditions uncovered scattered clues, skeletal remains, abandoned campsites, cryptic notes, and artifacts, literally frozen in time. Studies in recent years suggest a slow, agonizing decline in health for the men before death. The men likely succumbed to a combination of hypothermia, starvation, scurvy, and possibly lead poisoning from poorly salted tin rations. Traces of zinc deficiency were also found in some remains. Even more disturbing, some of the recovered bones bore cut marks, evidence that cannibalism may have taken place in the desperate final stages of survival. Then, over 150 years after the expedition vanished, history surfaced. Literally. In 2014, a Parks Canada team discovered the wreck of HMS Erebus in the Queen Maud Gulf. Just 2 years later, the Terror was found, astonishingly well preserved, in Terror Bay, south of King William Island. Today, these wrecks are protected as a combined National Historic Site of Canada. In the summer of 2014, a boat carrying at least 243 refugees disappeared somewhere off the coast of Libya. No bodies were found. No debris was located. No survivors. Not a single confirmed detail about what happened next. The passengers, mostly Eritrean men, women, and children, a country in Northeast Africa, were fleeing one of the world's most repressive regimes. For $1,600 apiece, they entrusted their lives to smugglers who promised them safe passage across the Mediterranean, from the Libyan city of Al-Khums to Europe. But they never arrived. The smugglers were known. Miasho Tesfamariam, who arranged logistics and payments, and 3 others, Ibrahim, Jabir, and Jamal el-Saudi, a well-connected smuggling organizer in Libya. Tesfamariam would later be arrested, but his story was inconsistent. He claimed he didn't actually witness the boat's departure. But here's the strangest part. A ship that large, carrying hundreds of people, should leave at least some evidence that it sank. Even the most tragic Mediterranean shipwrecks left wreckage, bodies, something. This boat left nothing. An investigative reporter named Eric Reedy began chasing the mystery, using blogging and crowdsourcing to try and piece together the fragments. He would end up partnering with Medium editor Bobby Johnson, and together they launched the Ghost Boat Project to try and track what happened to the missing. At one point, there was hope. A phone call claimed that some of the passengers were detained in Tunisia, but that too was a dead end. Experts were baffled. Eritrean activist Alganesh Fiseha, herself a survivor of the regime the refugees fled, said it best. It is impossible that they disappeared into thin air. And yet, over a decade later, the ghost boat and the people aboard it remain just that, ghosts. It was January 2002 in Argentina's Entre Rios province when the Gill family disappeared. Ruben, his wife Margarita, and their 4 children lived on La Candelaria, a sprawling 500-hectare ranch located near the tiny village of Crucecitas Septimas. The ranch was owned by a man named Alfonso Guete, and the Gills worked the land as caretakers, scraping together a humble but stable life. On January 12, 2002, Ruben and Margarita took their children into town to visit a friend named Maximo Vega in Viale. To all accounts, it was an ordinary visit. Nothing seemed unusual. But after that night, no one ever saw them again. It wasn't until April, 3 months later, that Alfonso Guete finally returned the multiple phone calls from the Gill family's relatives, who at this point were concerned after not having heard from their family since January. Guette claimed the Gills had taken an extended vacation, something he had supposedly approved in January. But to their loved ones, that explanation didn't sit right. They found that Margarita hadn't collected her last paycheck from the school where she worked. The family didn't even have a vehicle. Then the first strange clue. On January 13th, the day after the last time the family was seen, calls were made from Ruben's cell phone to an unknown woman in Rosario. Authorities were never able to trace her, and Ruben's phone remained active, inexplicably, for over a year following. Ruben's sister, Luisa, filed the initial missing persons report with local police, but the investigation quickly fell into obscurity. Meanwhile, suspicions began to mount that the family hadn't left willingly. In 2006, a lawyer named Elvio Garzon publicly accused local police of interfering in the case. He even claimed that some of the same officers had been linked to two other disappearances, an accountant and an architect, in the same region of Argentina. But this explosive claim was never formally investigated. It wasn't until 2008, 6 years after their disappearance, that investigators finally returned to La Candelaria with forensic tools. They tore up floorboards. They dug out wells. They sprayed luminol, a chemical that reveals traces of blood invisible to the naked eye. And what they found was disturbing. Multiple human blood samples were found. However, there were no matches to the Gill family. Forensic entomologists that visited the ranch noted the presence of certain insects, species known to hover near decomposing human bodies. Everyone seemed to agree that something had happened on that ranch. But the question of where the Gills were remained. In the years that followed, leads were pursued across multiple Argentine provinces, and even into Paraguay and Brazil. Theories spread of the possibilities that the family had been forcibly kidnapped, or there was a violent confrontation with someone on the ranch, or even a personal dispute, like a secret affair that turned deadly. But nothing ever stuck. Then, in 2018, a rural contractor named Armando Nani came forward. He claimed that on January 14, 2002, just one day after the family disappeared, he saw Ruben Gill in distress, angry about having to dig wells on the property. That clue led investigators to a new search of a water well on the land, but they only found animal bones. Nani also mentioned a nearby stream and said parts of the terrain had clearly been disturbed. Firefighters examined it. They confirmed that someone had been digging, but they found no sign of the missing family. Meanwhile, Ruben's brother Osvaldo and Margarita's mother Adelia begged authorities to investigate the basement of the main house. They alleged that the ranch's owner, Alfonso Guette, had once sealed it and built over it. Guette himself maintained that the family had gone to Santa Fe to visit relatives or had headed northeast in search of work. He claimed they left behind money, documents, even personal items. But when the family's relatives were finally allowed inside the house, they found no such belongings. What they did find were burned mattresses and blood mixed into the dirt. According to Ruben's sister, Luisa, Guette admitted to burning the mattresses because they were, quote, stained with blood, unquote. But Guette was never charged. And in 2016, any chance of questioning him again was lost forever, when on June 16th, Alfonso Guette died in a car crash. To this day, the fate of the Gill family, Ruben, Margarita, and their 4 children, Maria Ofelia, Osvaldo Jose, Sofia Margarita, and Carlos Daniel, remains one of Argentina's most haunting unsolved mysteries. 6 lives, gone, with no evidence that they ever even existed. In the darkness of April 14, 2014, the quiet town of Chibok, Nigeria, a small majority Christian village, was jolted awake by the sound of engines, shouting, and gunfire. Hours earlier, warnings had come from neighboring towns. Convoys of armed men were heading toward Chibok, but no help ever arrived. What happened next would become one of the most haunting mass kidnappings of the 21st century. Under the cover of night, fighters from the Islamic extremist group Boko Haram stormed the government girls' secondary school. Disguised in military uniforms and posing as Nigerian soldiers, they told the girls they had come to evacuate them, to protect them. Instead, they burned homes, exchanged gunfire with the outnumbered local garrison, and forced nearly 300 schoolgirls, aged 16 to 18, into waiting trucks. Some were crammed into vehicles. Others were forced to march into the wilderness. Their destination was the dense, hostile expanse of the Sambisa forest, a place where Boko Haram had established fortified camps deep in its trees. But what makes the Chibok abductions especially chilling isn't just the brutality of the crime, it's how preventable it might have been. The school had already been closed for weeks due to safety concerns, yet the girls had returned, many from nearby towns, to take their final physics exams. And according to Amnesty International, the Nigerian military had received a warning about the incoming attack 4 hours before it began. 4 hours. But no reinforcements were sent. In the days that followed, frantic parents formed search parties and ventured into the forest themselves. Armed with nothing but hope, they returned empty-handed. 57 girls managed to escape, leaping from moving trucks, hiding in the brush under the cover of night. The rest just disappeared. Some of the girls were said to have been split up, forced into marriage, used as human shields, or indoctrinated into Boko Haram's ranks. Others were believed to be held near Lake Chad or in camps high in the Gorsi Mountains. For years, sightings trickled in, grainy footage, whispered testimonies, but most were never seen again. The Nigerian government's shifting statements, initial denials, and miscounted numbers only deepened the despair. The world watched in horror. Hashtags spread, protests erupted. "Bring back our girls" became a global cry. But as the years wore on, the voices began to fade. A decade later, over 90 of the girls are still missing, and a generation carries the weight of what was lost on that night. On May 1st, 2008, in the gated upscale community of Sugarloaf Springs in Gwinnett County, Georgia, Hal Wennell returned home to find something no husband should ever have to see. His wife, Kay Wennell, lay lifeless in the kitchen, surrounded by a pool of blood. Kay was 60 years old, a former model, well-known and well-liked. But that morning, something brutal had happened behind the walls of their home. Investigators said she had been punched in the face, chased through the kitchen, and her throat slashed twice with a blade so sharp it was compared to a scalpel. There was blood everywhere, but nothing else. No signs of a break-in. No fingerprints. No footprints. No foreign hairs or fibers. Every drop of blood at the scene belonged to Kay. Whoever had done this had left no trace. Police looked first at Hal. The husband is always the first question mark in a case like this, but there was no evidence of a motive, no history of violence, no sign of an affair, nothing to suggest a fracture in their marriage. After 3 weeks of intense investigation, Hal was cleared. He had an airtight alibi. And more than that, he was desperate to find the truth. He hired private investigators and offered a $250,000 reward for any information that could lead to an arrest. But if it wasn't Hal, then who was the killer? Kay wasn't even supposed to be home that day. She had called in sick to work, a last-minute decision. Investigators believe her killer was someone she knew, someone who knew her schedule, her habits, and who could walk up to the front door without raising suspicion. As investigators searched for leads, a witness came forward. A woman in the neighborhood remembered seeing a man, alone, on foot, with no car in sight. He was holding a real estate flyer, claiming to be looking for a home listed for sale nearby. Later that same day, that man was seen again, this time walking toward the Wennell residence. The timing matched the estimated window of Kay's murder. A composite sketch was drawn from the witness's description. The face in the sketch triggered a chilling memory. There was a striking resemblance to a man seen years earlier in photographs with Kay during a trip to Las Vegas. Who he was, or what connection he had to her, remains unknown to this day. Investigators believe Kay willingly opened the front door to her killer, someone she likely recognized. He struck her immediately. A calculated blow. Evidence at the scene, including fragments of latex gloves found inside the house and on the back deck, suggested the killer was right-handed and prepared. Kay ran. She tried to make it to the kitchen, maybe to the phone, maybe to the back door, but she didn't make it far. Her attacker caught up with her, slashed her throat once. Then again with what detectives would later call an insurance cut. A second deliberate strike to ensure she wouldn't survive the assault. Then, just as quickly as he arrived, he disappeared. Police believe he escaped through the wooded area behind the Wennell home. A year would pass with no progress in solving the case, until something arrived in the mail that would take the mystery in a darker, stranger direction. Months after Kay's murder, a letter arrived at the Norcross office of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. It was anonymous, crafted from cutout magazine letters, the kind you'd expect to see in a ransom note from a movie. The message claimed that Kay was deeply unhappy in her marriage, that she had told someone, presumably the letter's author, that she wanted to leave her husband. It said that she told the writer that they could be together, but in the end, she chose to stay with Hal. The letter was quickly handed over to police. It was examined at the crime lab. But there were no fingerprints, no DNA, no forensics at all. Just words, carefully pieced together to tell a story no one could verify. Some investigators believed the letter was real, that it came from a spurned lover, enraged by rejection. Others weren't convinced. Former FBI profiler Mary Ellen O'Toole described the note as scripted, too staged to be authentic. This is someone pretending to be the killer, a boogeyman, designed to send investigators in the wrong direction. 2 years after Kay's murder, Hal Wennell died of a heart attack. He was 74. His estate shut down the private investigation, and the reward was withdrawn. He was buried beside the woman he had spent his remaining years fighting to get justice for. Justice that, unfortunately, never came. The murder of Kay Wennell remains unsolved. If you have any information, contact the Gwinnett County Criminal Investigation Division at 770-513-5390 or Crime Stoppers Atlanta at 404-577-8477. Nairn, Scotland, is a quiet seaside town known more for its postcard views than violent crime. But on the evening of November 28, 2004, something happened here that shattered the calm community. At around 7 p.m., the doorbell rang at the Wilson home on Crescent Road. Veronica Wilson opened the door to find a man she didn't recognize, wearing a dark blue jacket, jeans, and a baseball cap. He calmly asked for her husband by name. Alistair Wilson, a 30-year-old banker and father of two, came to the door. The man handed him a small blue envelope with a single word written on the front: Paul. The envelope was empty. Confused, Alistair returned to the living room to show the envelope to his wife. Then he turned around and went back to the door. Moments later, 3 gunshots. Veronica rushed to the entrance to find her husband lying on the doorstep, bleeding. Alistair Wilson was dead. What followed was one of the largest murder inquiries Scotland had ever seen. Hundreds of interviews, door-to-door investigations. Yet the case stalled almost immediately. No suspect, no clear motive, and that strange blue envelope never explained. Nearly 2 decades later, the mystery still grips the country. The murder of Alistair Wilson isn't just unsolved, it's unexplainable. In October 2020, a new voice entered the public search for answers: Alistair's son, Andrew, who had been just a child when his father was killed. Now grown, he made a direct appeal for information, urging anyone with knowledge to come forward. Around the same time, police disclosed a detail they had long kept quiet. The weapon used in the killing was a rare 1930s-era Henel pocket pistol, .25 caliber, an old, obscure firearm not commonly found in the UK. Investigators hoped someone, somewhere, might recognize it, or remember who had access to one. Then, in April 2022, a potential motive finally surfaced. Police revealed that in the weeks before his death, Alistair had been involved in a heated dispute over a hotel decking area being built just across the street. He had opposed the construction, lodging formal complaints and trying to halt the project. Detectives now believe this dispute could be at the center of the case. The hotel owner was ruled out as a suspect, but investigators suggested the killer, or killers, might have been connected to the project. Maybe builders or contractors. In 2023, Police Scotland revealed that they now believe 2 people were involved in the shooting. One of them, they said, was a local man with a criminal history, a former inmate with drug convictions. They stopped short of naming him, but made it clear they were close. Still, as of May 2025, the case remains unsolved. Alistair Wilson's murder wasn't random. It wasn't impulsive. It was targeted, calculated, and as of now, still unanswered. By the 1930s, Alcatraz was already infamous. A fortress built on a rocky island in the frigid waters of San Francisco Bay, it was a prison designed to break men's hopes. In 1934, it was redesigned to be even tougher. Reinforced iron bars, armed guard towers, and relentless routines that included 12 inmate checks every single day. Escape wasn't just unlikely. It was believed to be impossible. From its reopening in 1934 to its closure in 1963, 36 men tried to escape. 14 separate attempts. Most were captured. Some drowned. None were confirmed to have made it to land. Until 3 inmates came up with a plan that would make history. Frank Morris arrived at Alcatraz in January 1960. Smart, calculating, and a known escape artist, he'd already broken out of several facilities. Later that year, another familiar face arrived: John Anglin. His brother Clarence followed in early 1961. The three had met years earlier in another prison. Now they were neighbors, assigned to adjacent cells. And in the shadows of America's most secure prison, they began to plot. On the morning of June 12, 1962, guards conducted the routine bed check. But this time, something was wrong. 3 beds, 3 bodies, but all 3 were decoys. Frank Morris, John Anglin, Clarence Anglin, gone. In each of their beds, guards found carefully crafted dummy heads, made from plaster, painted to match skin tone, and topped with real human hair. In the dim light of early morning, they were convincing enough to fool even seasoned guards. By the time anyone realized, the men were long gone. Alcatraz went into full lockdown. The prison was searched from top to bottom. Boats, helicopters, and floodlights scoured the bay. But there was no sign of Morris or the Anglin brothers. Whether they made it to land or drowned in the attempt remains one of America's greatest unsolved mysteries. Some believe the strong currents and frigid temperatures would have made survival impossible. Others point to strange clues suggesting the escape might have succeeded. In 2013, the San Francisco Police Department received a letter. It was addressed from someone claiming to be John Anglin. "My name is John Anglin. I escaped from Alcatraz in June 1962 with my brother Clarence and Frank Morris. I'm 83 years old and in bad shape. I have cancer. Yes, we all made it that night. But barely." The letter went on to make an offer. Announce on television that he would only serve a year in prison and receive medical care, and he would reveal his location. The letter ended with, "This is no joke." But the letter led nowhere. No follow-up, no arrests. Today, the fate of the 3 escapees remains unknown. It's a question that still haunts the legend of Alcatraz. December 23, 1974. Fort Worth, Texas, just 2 days before Christmas. 17-year-old Mary Rachel Terlica, 14-year-old Renee Wilson, and 9-year-old Julie Mosley set out for an afternoon of Christmas shopping. They were headed for the Seminary South Shopping Center, a retail center crowded with last-minute shoppers. They were never seen again. The girls made a few stops that morning, including a surplus store where they picked up layaway gifts. Witnesses would later place them inside the mall. But when 6 p.m. rolled around and they hadn't returned, their worried families began to search. At the mall's upper-level parking lot near Sears, they found Rachel's Oldsmobile. Inside, shopping bags, untouched. No signs of a struggle, no sign of the girls. Their families waited through the night, scanning the crowds, hoping for movement, hoping for anything. But the girls never came back. Police initially treated the case as a runaway scenario. 3 girls, they said, who had chosen to disappear for a little while. But then came the letter. It arrived the next day, postmarked from Fort Worth, addressed to Tommy Terlica, Mary Rachel's husband. Something wasn't right. The envelope was addressed in pencil. In the upper left corner, the name Rachel was scribbled as a return address. The L had been written as a lowercase e, then clumsily corrected. It was a small mistake, but it was telling. And then there was the postmark. Faint. Incomplete. The city name was missing. All that remained was a smeared zip code, 76083, a number that didn't exist. Was it meant to be 76083 from Eliasville, or 76088 from Weatherford? The final digit was warped, possibly reversed. But inside, the letter was written in ink, on a piece of paper noticeably larger than the envelope itself. The salutation, Thomas A. Terlica, felt stiff and impersonal. Mary Rachel would have used Tommy. The letter read, "I know I'm going to catch it, but we had to get away. We're going to Houston. See you in about a week. The car is in Sears' upper lot. Love, Rachel." The handwriting looked shaky. The phrasing didn't sound like Rachel, and those closest to her, family, friends, even handwriting experts, agreed. It didn't seem like something she would write. If she didn't write it, then who did, and why? The letter was handed over to authorities. Even the FBI weighed in. But in the end, their conclusions were inconclusive. For decades, the search continued. Investigators traced rural roads across Texas. Families walked through creek beds, combed remote woods, and knocked on doors, hoping for any scrap of information. Again and again, they came up empty. Tips flooded in over the years, each one a flicker of hope, each one extinguished just as quickly. No suspects, no arrests, no sign of the girls. Now, more than half a century later, the trail is cold. And the question that haunted Fort Worth in 1974 is still unanswered. Where are Mary Rachel, Renee, and Julie? On the evening of December 12, 1991, Gregory McRoberts was last seen riding his bicycle along the quiet rural stretch of South Meridian Road, near his home in the isolated reaches of Lee Township, Midland County, Michigan. Earlier that day, McRoberts had run into car trouble. His vehicle had broken down, forcing him to leave it at the Silver Creek Inn, a roadside stop just a few miles away. That night, he set out on his bike, planning to return to the inn and fix the car himself. It should have been a short, uneventful ride, but Gregory never made it. By December 16th, 4 days later, he was officially reported missing. Friends and family clung to hope, waiting for any sign that he might return. But as the weeks passed, that hope began to fade. Then, on January 4th, 1992, a grim discovery was made. Gregory's body was found in a lonely, water-filled ditch on the west side of South Meridian Road. Partially submerged in icy water, his life had not ended peacefully, but in violence. Investigators determined he had been struck and killed in a hit-and-run accident, left alone in the cold night. The investigation unearthed troubling clues. The vehicle that struck Gregory McRoberts was believed to be a light blue four-door Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme, or possibly a Brougham model, manufactured between 1982 and 1987. Evidence from the scene suggested it had suffered heavy damage to the front passenger side. There would probably be faint traces of tan or red paint on the car, likely transferred from Greg's bicycle. The case would go cold until nearly 14 years later. On March 25, 2005, Greg's parents received an anonymous, typewritten 2-page letter. The unknown author claimed responsibility for the crash, confessing to being the one behind the wheel that cold December night in 1991. The letter revealed details that only the true driver could have known, specifics about the scene, the impact, and what followed. In a bold and rare move, the Midland County Sheriff's Office released the contents of the letter to the public. Their hope was that somewhere, someone might recognize a detail. Investigators believe someone out there knows more. Maybe a friend who noticed a damaged car, or a confidant who heard a quiet confession. Today, the McRoberts family continues to live with the ache of unanswered questions. They need closure. They deserve the truth. If you know anything at all, it might be the piece that completes this puzzle. Please contact the Midland County Sheriff's Office tip line at 989-839-4609. Because after all these years, someone still knows what happened on South Meridian Road in Midland County, Michigan, and it's time to speak up. In August 1587, more than 100 English settlers vanished from Roanoke Island. When Governor John White returned to Roanoke from England 3 years later, he found the colony completely deserted. No bodies, no clues, only a single word carved into a tree: Croatoan. Then, 350 years later, a strange stone surfaced. In 1937, a California man named Lewis E. Hammond walked into Emory University with a 21-pound rock. He claimed to have found it near the Chowan River in North Carolina, and etched into its surface was a haunting message. One side read, "Ananias, Dare, and Virginia went hence unto heaven, 1591. Any Englishman show this rock to John White, Governor of Virginia." The other side read, "Father, soon after you go for England, we came here. Only misery and war for 2 years. Above half dead these 2 years. More from sickness, being 24. A savage with a message of a ship came to us. Within a small space of time, they became frightened of revenge and ran all away. We believe it was not you." Soon after, the savages said spirits were angry. Suddenly, they murdered all save 7. My child and Ananias, too, were slain with much misery, buried all near 4 miles east of this river, upon a small hill. Names were written all there on a rock. Put this there also. If a savage shows this to you, we promised you would give them great plenty presents. EWD. It was a plea for help, signed EWD, the initials of Eleanor White Dare, the governor's daughter. The stone told of sickness, of death, of a mass grave. It suggested that the colonists hadn't simply disappeared. They'd moved, fled, fought to survive. This sparked a media frenzy. Headlines screamed about the Rosetta Stone of American history. Soon, more stones emerged, 47 more, from locations stretching across the southeast. Most were brought in after a reward was offered, and nearly all bore inscriptions from Eleanor White Dare to her father. They painted a grim saga, a slow migration from Roanoke to the Chattahoochee River Valley, and a tragic unraveling between 1591 and 1603. But then came the scrutiny. Scholars noticed inconsistencies in the language and carving style. Many of the later stones traced back to a single man, a Georgia stonecutter named Bill Eberhart. By 1941, experts and journalists had declared the entire collection a hoax, except one. Hammond's original stone, the first, the one that started it all, still lingers in uncertainty. No one has proven it genuine. No one has proven it fake. Today, all 48 stones are kept at Brenau University in Gainesville, Georgia. Most are still dismissed as fakes, but the first remains a puzzle carved in stone, a whisper from the lost colony that can still be heard today. From a stone that may hold the voice of a vanished colony, to circles that have no single author, yet speak a universal truth, we move from a mystery of words to one of balance. The medicine wheel is one of the oldest and most mysterious symbols found across North America. But it isn't a single artifact or even a single tradition. It's a circle of meanings, different for each indigenous culture, yet consistently powerful. At its core, the medicine wheel represents balance, the constant interaction between body, mind, emotion, and spirit. It reflects the cycle of life, the turning of the seasons, and the individual's place within nature, a sacred circle, unbroken and whole. There are two sides to the medicine wheel story. One is symbolic, personal, and lived. The other is created with stone. According to the Royal Alberta Museum, a stone medicine wheel has at least two of these traits: a central stone mound, concentric rings of stones, or lines radiating from the center like spokes on a wheel. Using that definition, Alberta is home to 46 of them, 2/3 of all known medicine wheels on Earth. The Canadian Plains are their heartland. Some wheels are estimated to date back to 4000 BC, the same era as Egypt's pyramids. Others, like the legendary Bighorn medicine wheel in Wyoming, may be even older. Some oral traditions suggest it has existed in various forms for millions of years. Whether literal or symbolic, the message is that this is not just history. It's part of a legacy. The term medicine wheel itself wasn't coined by native peoples. It came from outsiders at the turn of the 20th century, who encountered the Bighorn wheel and tried to label what they didn't fully understand. Even today, these circles remain places of ceremony, reflection, and mystery. No two are identical, but all are aligned, with the stars, with the earth, and with something deeper still. But not all stones heal. Some are feared. In Japan, one such rock carries a curse, and a legend of shape-shifting deception, imperial downfall, and the spirit that would not die. In the mountains of Nasu, in Japan, where the earth breathes sulfur and the ground smokes, sits a stone with a reputation soaked in fear. Locals call it Seisho Seki, the killing stone. According to legend, it kills anyone who touches it. But the true terror behind the stone lies in the tale of Tamamo no Mae, one of Japan's most infamous spirits, a nine-tailed fox in disguise. In the 12th century, during the reign of Emperor Toba, a mysterious woman appeared at court. Stunningly beautiful, impossibly intelligent, and irresistibly charming. She called herself Tamamo no Mae. But behind the mask was something ancient, something malevolent. The emperor grew ill. No one could explain it, until a court astrologer revealed the truth. The woman was a kitsune, a fox spirit feeding off his life. Her disguise was flawless, but the magic had limits. Exposed, Tamamo no Mae fled the palace and vanished into the wild. Samurai were sent to hunt her down. She evaded them for weeks, shifting shape. But finally, an arrow found its mark. Her body died. Her spirit did not. Her soul, twisted and vengeful, is said to have fused with a rock, transforming it into the Seisho Seki, the killing stone. For centuries, no one dared touch it. Then in March 2022, something changed. Visitors to Nasu discovered the stone had split clean in two. Scientists blamed weathering. Others weren't so sure. Onlookers whispered that the fox spirit had broken free. Local officials didn't take chances. On March 26, 2022, Shinto priest held a purification ritual at the site, waving sacred haragushi, offering prayers, and making peace with what might still linger beneath the surface. In the heart of New England, the ground holds secrets, half buried in forests, tangled in roots, and draped in centuries of moss. Stone walls, chambers, altars. By the 1930s, some estimated there were over 250,000 miles of stone walls across the region, enough to circle the Earth 10 times. And while many were built by colonial hands, others don't fit the blueprint. Some structures align with the stars. Others stand near dolmens and megaliths. A few contain stone slabs that look eerily like beds or altars. Massachusetts holds the densest concentration of stone chambers in North America, 105 sites in total. Many are beehive-shaped, echoing the architecture of Culdee monks from ancient Ireland. Is it coincidence or a clue? Connecticut has 62 sites. New Hampshire has 51, and Vermont has 41. Even tiny Rhode Island holds 12. And always, these clusters hug riverways, the Merrimack, the Thames, the Connecticut, as if ancient travelers had once journeyed inland by water, leaving stone behind as they went. When English colonists arrived, they found many of these buildings already standing. Round or rectangular, sometimes 30 feet long, with roof openings that cast slivers of light inside, like a primitive skylight. Early reports described them as Indian stone castles. No one knew who built them, or why. Some may have been ceremonial sites built by native peoples. Others could be colonial constructions, root cellars, birthing rooms, or storage spaces. But a few bear features that hint at defense, fortifications without a war. We may never know the full story, but the stones remain, part of a rich past that never made it into textbooks. Near the banks of Tullaroop Creek, 5 kilometers southeast of Carisbrooke, Victoria, lies a site that speaks softly, but with ancient weight. A crescent of boulders 60 meters long, circles of stone, a lone pile of rock. Together, they form the Carisbrooke stone arrangement, one of only 4 known Aboriginal stone arrangements in the entire state, and the only one shaped like a boomerang. Or is it? The shape arcs gently, but precisely. The sides run parallel, the ends don't curve inward, details that defy the flight lines of a real boomerang. Some believe it's not a weapon at all, but something far older, and far more cosmic. One theory suggests the arc mirrors the Milky Way, that the mound marks Sirius, the brightest star. 2 smaller stone circles could represent the Magellanic Clouds, a sacred sky chart set in stone. The ends of the crescent align with the cardinal points, and based on comparisons with other ceremonial sites, some archaeologists suggest it may have been a male initiation ground. What's clear is that this place was built with purpose, and it wasn't random. But for nearly a century after European settlement, the site went unrecorded. Aboriginal traditions in the area were fragmented, survivors of disease, dispossession, and silencing. Then in 1963, a local landowner reported it. The Victorian Archaeological Survey followed in the 1980s. And slowly, the pieces began to return to the people who understood them best. This is Wurrung country, part of the Djadja Nation. Today, after years of state protection and transfer of ownership, the land belongs to the Ballarat Aboriginal Cooperative, who now serve as its custodians. We may never fully know what each circle, mound, or arc meant, but the stones remain, aligned, preserved, and watched over, carrying meaning beyond the reach of time. Between April 1971 and September 1972, 6 girls were abducted and murdered in Washington, D.C. All were found near highways. All were young. And all, police believe, were killed by the same man. The first victim was 13-year-old Carol Denise Spinks. On April 25, 1971, Carol walked half a mile from her southeast D.C. apartment to a nearby 7-Eleven in Maryland. Her sister had sent her for groceries. Carol never made it home. 6 days later, her body was discovered dumped on a grassy embankment along I-295. She'd been assaulted and strangled, and her shoes were missing. Darlenia Denise Johnson, 16, disappeared on July 8, 1971, on her way to her summer job at Oxon Hill Recreation Center. A witness later reported seeing her in an older model black car driven by a young black man. 11 days later, her body was found, just 15 feet from where Carol's body had been located. Stranger still, someone had already told police where to look. An anonymous caller described the location in detail, information only the killer would know. By then, the heat had taken its toll. Her body was too decomposed to confirm if there had been an assault, but signs of strangulation were present. Like Carol, she was found clothed, but barefoot. Then came 10-year-old Brenda Faye Crockett. On July 27th, Brenda ran an errand for her mother and didn't come back. At 9:20 p.m., the phone rang in the Crockett home. Her 7-year-old sister picked up. A girl was on the other end crying. It was Brenda. "A white man picked me up and I'm heading home in a cab," she said. "I think I'm in Virginia." Then quickly, "Bye." Click. A short time after Brenda Crockett's first call, the phone rang again. This time her stepfather answered. Brenda was still on the line. She repeated the same strange message, that she had been picked up and she would be coming home in a cab. But this time she added a haunting question. "Did my mother see me?" She went on to say that she was alone in a house with a white man. Her stepfather urged her to put the man on the phone. There was a pause, then the sound of heavy footsteps in the background. "I'll see you," Brenda said. Then silence. Police believe those calls were staged. The killer likely forced Brenda to deliver a script. False details meant to mislead investigators, throw off the timeline, and buy himself time to finish what he'd started. By dawn, the truth was clear. At 5:50 a.m. the next morning, a hitchhiker discovered Brenda's body dumped along U.S. Route 50 near the Baltimore-Washington Parkway in Prince George's County. Like the others, she had been assaulted and strangled. Like the others, she had no shoes. 3 months passed. Then the killer struck again. On the evening of October 1st, 1971, 12-year-old Nenemoshia Yates was walking home from a Safeway store around 7 p.m. She never arrived. Within hours, her body was found off the shoulder of Pennsylvania Avenue, also in Prince George's County. The same pattern: assaulted, strangled, barefoot. A witness had seen her entering a blue Volkswagen. The lead seemed promising, but it went nowhere. It was after Nenemoshia's murder that the press gave the killer a name: the Freeway Phantom, in a headline that signaled this was no longer a string of tragic coincidences. It was a serial killer on the loose. On the night of November 15th, 1971, 18-year-old Brenda Denise Woodard had dinner with a high school classmate in D.C. before catching a city bus home to her Maryland Avenue apartment. She never made it. 6 hours later, her body was found near the access ramp to Route 202 from the Baltimore-Washington Parkway. She had been stabbed repeatedly. Unlike the earlier victims, Woodard was still wearing her shoes. In one of the coat pockets, police found a piece of paper, torn from Woodard's own school notebook. Scrawled across it was a message. "This is tantamount to my insensitivity to people, especially women. I will admit the others when you catch me, if you can. Freeway Phantom." It was the first and only written communication from the killer. The inconsistent capitalization, the erratic grammar, the cocky challenge to police, it all painted a picture of someone reveling in control. Then, nearly a year of silence. The Phantom's last known victim was 17-year-old Diane Williams, a senior at Ballou High School. On September 5th, 1972, she cooked dinner for her family and then visited her boyfriend. At 11:20 p.m., she boarded a bus to head home. She was never seen alive again. A few hours later, her body was discovered beside I-295, just south of the D.C. line. Like most of the others, she had been strangled. She was fully clothed, her shoes missing. There were no signs of assault. Then, the Freeway Phantom seemingly disappeared. After the murder of Diane Williams, the killing stopped, but the investigation didn't. Leads poured in through hotlines and letters. The FBI joined forces with the Metropolitan Police, Maryland State Police, and multiple county detectives. They followed every thread, some unraveling quickly, others requiring months of work. None led to an arrest. At the time, policy was that the D.C. homicide detectives kept their case files personally. Over the years, many of those files were lost, discarded, or broken into fragments. Physical evidence vanished, notes were destroyed, and the core task force, the people who knew the case best, have all either retired or died by now. Today, the Freeway Phantom case remains open and in the hands of the Metropolitan Police Department's Cold Case Unit. A $150,000 reward is still on the table, but no suspect has ever been charged. Now, over 50 years later, the girls that were brutally killed are still without justice. Between 2005 and 2009, 8 women were murdered in Jefferson Davis Parish, Louisiana. Their bodies were dumped in the bayous and around the small town of Jennings, a small town with a population under 11,000. Most were too decomposed to determine how they died. None of their killers have been brought to justice. The press called them the Jeff Davis 8. Others knew them as the Jennings 8. The first body surfaced on May 20th, 2005. Loretta Lewis, 28, was found floating in a river by a fisherman. In the 4 years that followed, 7 more women were found, all discarded in murky backwaters or on the side of roads. Ernestine Marie Daniels Patterson, 30, and Laconia Muggy Brown, 23, were found with their throats slashed. For the rest of the victims, the remains were far too deteriorated by the time they were found to identify a cause of death. The connections didn't stop at geography. Most of the victims knew each other intimately. Some were related. Kristen Gary Lopez, 21, and Brittany Gary, 17, were cousins. Kristen had also lived with Crystal Benoit, 24, shortly before both women were found dead. They moved in the same circles. They shared the same struggles: addiction, poverty, mental illness, and a life of work on the streets of Jennings, Louisiana. And they shared something else. Many of them had served as police informants. In fact, several had given information about the other victims before they themselves were killed. That's when the whispers began, about corruption, about cover-ups, about killers hiding in plain sight. The story of the Jeff Davis 8 isn't just about a string of murders. It's about what happened around them, and who may have helped cover them up. One of the victims, Kristen Lopez, had witnessed the fatal police shooting of a drug dealer named Leonard Crochet in 2005. She wasn't alone. Among those present were several individuals later connected to the Jeff Davis 8 case, including Alvin Bootsy Lewis, who fathered a child with victim Whitney Dubois, 26, and was also the brother-in-law of the first known victim, Loretta Lewis. A grand jury reviewed the Crochet shooting and declined to charge the officers involved. But the Louisiana State Police investigation had concluded Crochet was unarmed when he was killed. Whispers turned into allegations. Some witnesses claimed the women were murdered because of what they knew about that shooting, and about those who pulled the trigger. In December 2008, law enforcement formed a multi-agency task force to investigate the murders. It included 14 federal, state, and local agencies. They said they were hunting a serial killer. But not everyone believed that. Journalist Ethan Brown, in his book Murder in the Bayou, uncovered evidence suggesting the women weren't killed by one predator, but by a network of people connected to drugs, law enforcement, and local politics. The deeper he dug, the messier it got. Family members of the victims didn't just suspect foul play. They suspected a cover-up and pointed fingers at the very people assigned to solve the case. Task force records include interviews with inmates who claimed local law enforcement had helped hide evidence. 2 female prisoners told investigators that sheriff's deputies were working with suspects to dispose of evidence related to Kristen Lopez's murder. The sergeant who recorded their statements was later forced out. The allegations were buried. Then came another twist. The sheriff's office's chief criminal investigator was accused of buying a truck that may have been used to transport one of the bodies, allegedly to help get rid of it. That same year, under growing pressure, the sheriff ordered samples of DNA from every investigator that was on the case. To this day, the results of those tests have never been released. What started as a search for a serial killer morphed into something else entirely. A dark web of vice, power, and institutional rot. This case has everything. Witnesses silenced or dismissed, evidence lost or untested, suspects released due to flawed or missing forensics. Over the years, police have made arrests and issued warrants in connection with the Jeff Davis 8, but none have led to lasting charges. To this day, the murders remain unsolved. Between February 1975 and January 1976, South Florida was haunted by a killer who preyed on women, then left their bodies floating in canals like discarded trash. Investigators dubbed the case the Flat Tire Murders, based on a theory that the perpetrator deflated his victims' tires, then posed as a good Samaritan to gain their trust, before revealing who he really was. 12 young women, all found in or near canals in Broward and Dade counties, are believed to be victims. Most had been assaulted and beaten. In all, investigators would eventually link up to 35 murders across multiple states to the same sadistic pattern, stretching back to the early 1970s, with possible origins in California. What made it harder to track was the killer's profile. A white male in his 20s, attractive, fit, and well-spoken. Not the man you picture lurking in the shadows, but someone you might trust, or even smile back at. 19-year-old Judy Esterling had just gotten off work at a massage parlor when she vanished on February 1st, 1975, in Dade County. 2 days later, her body surfaced in a canal, and her murder would become one of the earliest linked to the spree. Just weeks later, Barbara Davis Stevens, 23, disappeared on the evening of February 12th after telling someone she was heading to Coral Gables to visit a friend. Her Camaro was found abandoned near downtown Miami. On February 20th, her body was discovered in a wooded lot. She had been stabbed in the stomach multiple times, and she had been assaulted. Arietta Tinker, 17 at the time, was dropped off at a bar on Hollywood Beach by her husband at 1 p.m. on April 9, 1975. 3 days later, her body was pulled from Snake Creek Canal, but no obvious signs of trauma were found. However, investigators still classified her death as suspicious, and they suspected murder. Nancy Lee Fox, 19, from West Palm Beach, was last seen walking to a laundromat on June 13th. 2 days later, her body was found in a canal alongside Highway 27. She had been struck in the head and strangled before being dumped in the water. The killer showed no mercy for age. On June 18th, two 14-year-old girls, Barbie Schreiber and Belinda Zetterauer, left home for a sleepover in Hollywood, Florida. They never made it. The next morning, a family on a fishing trip found their bodies lying side by side near a canal. They had been shot and were fully clothed. 3 weeks later, on July 10th, 14-year-old Robin Leslie Losh was found in the same canal system, just half a mile from where Schreiber and Zetterauer were discovered. Her parents had reported her missing 2 days earlier when she didn't return from summer school. She had drowned. She, too, was fully clothed. Ronnie Sue Gorlin, 27, a respiratory therapist, left her Miami Beach apartment on July 22nd to visit her mother at Parkway Hospital. She never arrived. The next day, her body was found floating in the Graham Canal, assaulted and stabbed to death. Her rental car, a burgundy and white Oldsmobile Cutlass, turned up in a nearby shopping center parking lot. The tire had been slashed. 8 days later, Elise Rapp, 21, originally from New York City, disappeared after going shopping at a Hollywood mall. Her rented yellow Chevy Vega was found abandoned in the lot with a deflated tire. The next day, Rapp's body was pulled from the same canal where Gorlin had been found. She had been assaulted, then drowned. The tire deflation theory, once only a possibility, was beginning to look like a pattern. That fall, on October 17th, Mary Capola, 15, and Marlene Annabelli, 27, checked into a hotel in Fort Lauderdale. They were visiting from Pennsylvania and planned to stay for a week. 9 days later, a motorcyclist found their bodies dumped in a desolate area outside the city. Both had been strangled with rope. Then came Michelle Winters, 17. Her body surfaced in Snapper Creek on January 11, 1976, in Pembroke Pines. She had been last seen in early January in Fort Lauderdale. Friends said she was planning to enlist in the Navy. Her mother told police that Michelle often hitchhiked and likely got into the car willingly. She never got out. In all, over a dozen women were connected to the flat tire case. Dozens more, with similar MOs across state lines, may have been part of the same long, bloody spree. But the mystery remained. Until 2023. Using DNA preserved on victim clothing, Broward County investigators identified Robert Clark Keebler, a felon who died in 2019, as the prime suspect. They believe he may have had help, but now with Keebler dead, the case remains officially unsolved. It started with a trip to a museum. In 2000, Bruce and Andrea Leininger took their 22-month-old son James to the Kavanaugh Flight Museum outside Dallas. The toddler was wide-eyed, darting from exhibit to exhibit. But when he reached the World War II section, the boy's mood seemed to shift. He stood frozen in front of the warplanes, pointing silently, as if recognizing something he couldn't explain. They left with a few toy planes and a video called It's a Kind of Magic, a documentary about the Navy's Blue Angels. Back home in Texas, James watched it on repeat, day after day, week after week. He wasn't just interested, he was obsessed. And then things got strange. A few weeks after that museum trip, James began crashing his toy planes into the coffee table. Nose first, again and again, muttering a phrase he hadn't heard from his parents or the video. Airplane crash on fire. Then came the nightmares. Night after night, James would wake up screaming, soaked in sweat. At first, it was just cries. But soon he started yelling, "Airplane crash on fire! Little man can't get out." He repeated the phrase like a mantra of trauma, too young to fully speak in sentences, yet describing a scene with painful clarity. His father, a conservative Protestant and a skeptic by nature, tried to explain it away. But James kept saying it, even at the airport when they dropped his dad off for business trips. "Daddy, airplane crash on fire." At barely 2 years old, James Leininger was reliving something, over and over again. The nightmares continued for months, and slowly James began to talk, not like a child inventing a story, but like someone remembering something real. Lying in bed before sleep, he would whisper fragments of what he called memories. He said his plane had caught fire, that it had been shot down by the Japanese. Then, one night, just before his 3rd birthday, James added a new detail. His plane, he said, was a Corsair, a World War II fighter known for its distinctive bent wings and raw power. He spoke about flying it more than once. On August 27, 2000, at 28 months old, James casually told his parents, "My plane took off from a boat." When asked what the boat was called, he gave a name: Natoma. It was a word no toddler would invent. His father, still skeptical, searched the internet. What he found froze him. The USS Natoma Bay was a real ship, an escort carrier stationed in the Pacific during World War II. It had seen action in major battles, including the assault on Iwo Jima. A few weeks later, Bruce and Andrea asked James if he remembered anyone else who was with the little man, the pilot he screamed about in his dreams. James didn't hesitate. Jack Larson. The name meant nothing to them at the time. But while flipping through a book on the battle for Iwo Jima that Bruce planned to gift his father, James spotted a black and white aerial photo of the island. He pointed to the base of Mount Suribachi and said, "That's where my plane was shot down." Bruce blinked. "What?" James, steady and matter-of-fact, replied, "My airplane got shot down there, Daddy." A week later, Bruce contacted a veteran who had served aboard the Natoma Bay. The man confirmed it. There had been a pilot named Jack Larson. He'd flown off one day and never returned. No one knew what happened to him. By the time James could hold a crayon, he wasn't drawing houses or superheroes. He was drawing dogfights, warplanes in action, skies filled with bullets and smoke. Hundreds of sketches. Each one signed the same way. James 3. His parents asked him what it meant. He said simply, "Because I'm the 3rd James." His parents thought nothing of it until 2002, when James's father attended a Natoma Bay reunion. While he was there, he discovered something that shifted the ground beneath him. Jack Larson, the man James had named at 2 years old, had survived the war. He was alive. Only one pilot from the USS Natoma Bay had been killed during the Iwo Jima operation, a man named James M. Houston Jr., a 21-year-old from Pennsylvania. James M. Houston Jr. was shot down during a mission, not over Iwo Jima itself, but near Chichijima, as part of a strike on Japanese transport ships. His plane had been hit. It crashed in the ocean, exactly how James had described it. That's when it all clicked. The pilot James spoke about, the plane on fire, the nightmares, the drawing signed James 3, it all pointed to one man, James M. Houston Jr. In his son's young mind, the logic was simple. Houston was the 2nd James, and he was the 3rd. That wasn't all. The Leiningers spoke with Houston's surviving sister. James, still a child, described details about Houston's life, family memories, personal facts, that left her stunned. He also knew things about World War II aircraft and life aboard the Natoma Bay that his parents couldn't explain. His knowledge ran deep, beyond what could be chalked up to fascination or coincidence. To Bruce and Andrea, the pieces fit. Their son James was remembering a life that wasn't his. Or maybe it was, just not anymore. Born near Glasgow in August 2000, Cameron Macaulay seemed like any other child, until he began talking about an island he'd never seen. By the time he was 2, he was telling his mother some odd things. He spoke of a house on Barra, a remote island off Scotland's western coast. The island was over 200 miles away, reachable only by ferry or an hour-long flight. The family had no ties there, no relatives, no reason to even know the name. But Cameron knew it, and he wouldn't stop talking about it. At 3 years old, he was telling his teachers and classmates about his other family on Barra, every single day. He was obsessed. He told his mother, "I want to go to Bara. I need to see my real family." He described them in vivid detail. His father's name, he said, had been Shane Robertson, though some relatives heard him call the man Sean. He claimed his father had been hit by a car and killed, a green or silvery green one, after stepping out into the road. The story never changed. Cameron spoke with certainty, not like a child playing pretend, but like someone remembering something specific to him. He described his mother from Bara, first with long brown hair, then with it cut short. He said he had 3 brothers and 3 sisters, and named one of them, Lindsay. They used to play tag together outside their white house near the beach. And they had a dog. A black dog with a white patch on its chest, he said. He remembered playing with it in the yard. His mother, Norma, listened. At first she thought it might be imagination, but there was something about the way Cameron spoke, clear, consistent, and completely convinced, that made it impossible to ignore. Cameron McCauley described his other home in stunning detail, a white house, larger than the modest flat he shared with his mother and brother in Glasgow. He said it had multiple toilets, a feature that struck him as a child who only knew a single bathroom. He remembered boxes stacked outside and a black rotary phone, which he once mimed dialing with his fingers. There were rock pools where he swam, beaches where he played with his brothers and sisters, holidays with a family he still considered his own. And he remembered the airplanes. He said he could watch them land right on the sand. Cameron never spoke of growing up or dying. He remembered being a boy, perhaps just a little older than he was at the time, never a man. When asked how he got from the island of Barra to Glasgow, his answer was simple and strange. "I fell through." He said he'd somehow fallen through a hole connected to the White House and ended up in Norma's tummy. "I was in Barra," he told her, "and now I'm here." He never once wavered. He remembered his previous parents, his black and white sheepdog, and the yard they played in, and his sister Lindsay, and the warmth of family that felt more familiar to him than the life he was living. He spoke of Barra with longing, not like a vacation he wanted to revisit, but a home he'd been taken from. Cameron was sure. He had lived before, and he missed that life. In a quiet Thai village, a boy named Dalawang began speaking of a past life when he was just 3 years old. His memories weren't of another town or another family. They were of another species. He said he had been a snake. Dalawang was born into a modest, well-regarded family. His father knew many people in the nearby villages, including a man named Mr. Hugh. Neither Dalawang nor his mother had ever met Hugh before, but then came a neighborhood gathering that would bring them together. When the day of that party arrived, something unexpected happened. As soon as Dalawang laid eyes on Mr. Hugh, he lost control. The toddler screamed, thrashed, and tried to grab an object to attack the man. His mother was stunned. No one understood where the fury came from, until Dalawang, still trembling, explained, "He killed me," he said. The story poured out in pieces. He said he had lived in a cave and had fought off 2 dogs before their owner, Mr. Hugh, arrived. The confrontation ended with the snake's death. Dalawang remembered all of it. And that wasn't the end. He claimed that after his death, he existed briefly as a non-human spirit. In that state, he watched the men who had killed and eaten the snake. Among them was his future father. Dalawang said he followed him home, not because of the meal, but because his father had seemed kinder than the others. "So I followed him," he said, "and I went into my mother's body." There was no fear in his voice when he said it, only a kind of acceptance, as if he had walked a long road and now remembered where it began. When asked about his feelings toward Mr. Hugh, Dalawang surprised even his parents. "It is not good to be a snake," he said. "Mr. Hugh released me from that misery. It is better to be a human than a snake." In 2015, Luke Rillman, a 5-year-old from Ohio, began to say things that didn't quite make sense. Not for a little boy in preschool, not for any child. He told his mother, Erica, that in his previous life, he had been a woman named Pam. Pam, he said, had lived in Chicago, had black hair, and wore earrings. Luke talked about her often, slipping into first person without realizing it. Eventually, his mother asked him directly, "Who is Pam?" Luke didn't blink. I used to be Pam. Then I died," he said. According to Luke, Pam had died in a fire, a sudden, violent death. Afterward, he said he went to heaven, met God, and was then sent back down to earth, where he became Luke. It sounded like the wild imaginings of a child, except Luke kept talking about it. And he was consistent. Eventually, the family's story caught the attention of a paranormal investigation show, which brought in producers and researchers to test Luke's claims. As part of their research, they created a page filled with photos of African American women in their 30s, one of whom was Pam Robinson, a real woman from Chicago who died in a fire at the Paxton Hotel in 1993. Luke had never seen the photo before. He scanned the page once, then pointed without hesitation. "That's Pam," he said. Erica, still skeptical, eventually contacted Pam Robinson's family. What she learned chilled her. Pam had loved Stevie Wonder. So did Luke. Pam had played the keyboard. So did Luke, even though no one had taught him. They were tiny threads, but they didn't break. Luke never wavered in his story. He didn't want attention. He didn't try to make people believe him. He just said what he remembered. That he was once Pam, that he died in a fire, and that he came back. In 1907, 3-year-old Dorothy Eady fell down a flight of stairs in her London home and was pronounced dead. Minutes later, she was alive again, but something had changed. Not long after the accident, Dorothy began begging to go home. She cried when taken to church, but lit up at the sight of ancient Egyptian artifacts. When her parents showed her a photo of the Temple of Seti I at Abydos, she pointed and said, "That's my home. That's where I lived." As she grew, her obsession with Egypt only deepened. She claimed vivid memories of a past life as Bent Rashid, a priestess in the Temple of Seti I. She said she had fallen in love with the pharaoh himself and had become pregnant, a forbidden act that led her to take her own life to protect his name. These memories came to her, she said, in dreams, delivered by a spirit guide named Hor-Ra, who dictated the details of a life lived under the desert sun thousands of years earlier. In 1931, Dorothy moved to Egypt. She married an Egyptian man, had a son she named Seti, and from then on she was known as Seti, mother of Seti. Her marriage didn't last, but Egypt held her. She stayed, working alongside archaeologists and eventually becoming the caretaker of the Temple of Seti I, the very place she claimed to have served in her past life. Though many dismissed her reincarnation story, her knowledge of ancient Egyptian rituals and language stunned experts. She could describe religious ceremonies and temple layouts in uncanny detail, things no one had taught her. And then, there was the garden. Seti once told a team of excavators about a secret garden within the temple grounds, one that hadn't yet been found. She described its layout with precision. When archaeologists dug where she pointed, they found it, exactly as she'd said. She continued her work until her death in 1981, living in a small mud brick house near the temple she called home, in both lives. To some, she was a mystic. To others, a scholar. To all, Dorothy Eady was something rare, a woman whose life blurred the boundary between memory and myth, faith and fact. In the fossil-rich shale beds of Mason Creek, Illinois, something strange was pulled from the ancient mud, a creature so bizarre, so unlike anything else in the fossil record, that it would go on to baffle scientists for more than half a century. It was first discovered in 1958 by an amateur fossil hunter named Francis Tully, who brought the specimen to the Field Museum in Chicago. There, paleontologists stared in disbelief at the odd shape pressed into the stone. It had a soft, torpedo-shaped body, a long, tubular proboscis ending in what looked like a claw. And most bizarre of all, eyes perched on the ends of horizontal stalks extending from either side of its head. They named it Tulimonstrum gregarium, the Tully monster. And for decades, no one could say exactly what it was. Some believed it was a type of worm. Others suggested it was a mollusk. Some even compared it to an early primitive fish like a lamprey. It had no hard skeleton, and its alien anatomy didn't match any known group of animals. For years, it floated in scientific limbo, not clearly a vertebrate and not clearly an invertebrate either. Then in 2016, a team of researchers made headlines by claiming they had solved the mystery. Based on detailed analysis of soft tissue structures, including possible gill-like features, they proposed that the Tully monster was, in fact, a vertebrate. But the celebration didn't last long. Other scientists, using cutting-edge imaging and spectroscopy, disputed the findings. They argued that the so-called vertebrate features weren't what they appeared to be, and that the creature might still belong in the invertebrate world after all. The debate continues to this day, unresolved. Despite the mystery, Tullimonstrum gregarium has become a kind of cult fossil, the official state fossil of Illinois, a symbol of the deep past's never-ending strangeness. An organism from 300 million years ago that refuses to be easily categorized. It's as if nature once rolled the dice, created something completely new, and left it behind as a riddle for us to solve. In the waters of the River Dodder, just beneath Classon's Bridge in Dublin, something is standing in the water. It isn't a fish or a bird, or frankly anything native to Ireland. It's a life-size bronze rhinoceros, cold and weathered, planted on a concrete pedestal in the middle of the river. Its eyes are fixed to the west, toward Dartry Park. Its skin is wrinkled with uncanny realism, and its left ear is missing. No one knows how it got there. The sculpture appeared overnight in 2002, bolted into place beneath the bridge that runs beside the Dropping Well pub. The pub, which overlooks the site, was the first to be suspected. But management denied any involvement. They posted a photo of the rhino on their website, calling it our adopted pet rhino Woody. Beyond that, they claimed no knowledge of its origin. The mystery deepened. Neither Dublin City Council nor Dún Laoghaire Rathdown County Council had records of any artist's submission, any planning permission, any public art initiative. Officially, the rhino shouldn't exist. But there it stands, in broad daylight, unclaimed. To this day, no sculptor has come forward. No group has taken credit. No documentation has surfaced. Whoever placed the Dodder rhino did it quietly, perfectly, and left it there without anyone see it happen. In the early morning hours of October 1974, 2 Chicago police officers responded to a call that sounded like a prank. Someone claimed a kangaroo was loose in the city. But when the officers arrived, they saw it, tall, muscular, unmistakably kangaroo-like. As they approached the animal, it lashed out, kicking one of the men in the shin before bounding off into the city. That bizarre encounter wasn't an isolated one. Across decades and continents, people have reported sightings of kangaroos in places they absolutely shouldn't be. Places where no zoo had reported an escape, no sanctuary had issued an alert, and no explanation made sense. These strange, out-of-place sightings have become collectively known as the phantom kangaroo phenomenon. In the United States, sightings stretch back as far as 1934, when residents of South Pittsburgh, Tennessee, claimed to see a large kangaroo-like creature that reportedly attacked and killed animals, including ducks and dogs. Despite organized searches, nothing was ever captured. Across the Atlantic, the phenomenon took on a more tangible, yet equally strange, form. In the 1930s, wallabies escaped from a private zoo in Staffordshire, England, and reportedly formed a small breeding colony. The sightings didn't stop for decades. In Scotland, wallabies were deliberately introduced to Inchconachin Island in the 1920s, where they still live today, leaving tourists and hikers startled by the sight of hopping marsupials in the highlands. Even in France, the story played out in equally bizarre fashion. In the 1970s, several wallabies escaped from a zoological reserve near Imancé, southwest of Paris. Since then, they've carved out a quiet existence in the surrounding forests, occasionally spotted by startled hikers who often doubt what they're seeing. Then there's Japan. Between 2002 and 2011, more than 30 separate reports emerged from the mountainous district of Miyama in Miyagi Prefecture. Locals described kangaroo-like creatures in and out of the dense trees. No one could say where they came from. Some researchers chalk it all up to exotic pets escaping into the wild, particularly in countries with looser restrictions on private ownership. Others say it's just a case of misidentification, a large dog, a deer seen in the wrong light. And then there's the psychological explanation, the power of suggestion. One person claims a sighting, others hear about it, and suddenly kangaroos are appearing everywhere, even if they were never there to begin with. Yet with so many accounts, so many witnesses across so many countries, the mystery still lingers. Whether the phantom kangaroos are real animals gone rogue or simply the product of collective imagination, they continue to hop through the world, as half urban myth and half unshakable truth. Beneath the arches of St. Pancras Station in London, a secret lay buried. When excavation began in the early 2000s to accommodate larger high-speed trains for the Channel Tunnel rail link, archaeologists expected to find history, bones, artifacts, forgotten corners of London's past. What they didn't expect was a walrus. The team, led by archaeologist Phil Emery, knew they were digging into the graveyard of St. Pancras Old Church, a mass burial site from the 19th century. Epidemics of typhoid, cholera, and smallpox had left the area packed with human remains. Over 1,500 bodies. But there, buried with 8 human skeletons, they found the massive, unmistakable bones of a Pacific walrus. It wasn't just unusual, it was impossible. The Pacific walrus is no ordinary marine mammal. Native to the icy Bering Sea, it boasts tusks like a mammoth and can weigh nearly 2 tons. To find its remains in a coffin beneath central London, carefully buried, defied every expectation. The team reached out to the London Zoological Society for leads. Nothing. No records. No missing walrus. The only historical scrap they found was a bizarre mention of Prince Albert riding a giant tortoise. Still, 2 suspects emerged. The first walrus had arrived at the London Zoo in 1853 and was dissected for scientific study. The zoo, then just a short walk from St. Pancras, had a direct link to the golden age of anatomical dissection, a time when both human and animal bodies were prized for their scientific value. After all, it had only become legal to dissect human bodies in 1832. Who's to say a walrus wasn't tossed into the mix? The second walrus, known as Jemmy, arrived in 1867 after a perilous 3-month journey from the Labrador Sea. Shy and elusive, he was known to eat mussels from Billingsgate Market and occasionally respond to his name. Jemmy was a Victorian curiosity, a rare Arctic creature in a city still lit by gas lamps. And then there's the darker theory, body snatching. In pre-Victorian Britain, cadavers were currency, and the supply never met the demand. Surgeons paid well, and if you could smuggle in a rare specimen, even a walrus, you'd name your price. Some believe the bones found beneath St. Pancras belonged to such a prize. Perhaps snatched from a ship or stolen from the zoo. Dissected, studied, and finally disposed of with human remains in a quiet act of scientific cleanup. A coffin filled with stolen parts. A secret buried beneath the city. To this day, no one knows for sure. But somewhere beneath the tracks, in the shadow of King's Cross, there was the skull of a walrus found that should never have been there. A silent reminder that even the dead can carry mysteries deeper than the grave. In the wild, windswept hills of south-central France, between 1764 and 1767, an invisible terror stalked the province of Gévaudan. It came without warning. It vanished without a trace, and it left behind corpses, torn, half-eaten, and drained of hope. They called it La Bête du Gévaudan, the beast of Gévaudan, a predator so fearsome that it rewrote the psyche of an entire region. Witnesses described a monstrous animal with reddish-brown fur streaked with black, a long tail ending in a tuft, claws like hooks, and jaws packed with razored teeth. It was said to be as large as a calf and fast enough to bound across fields in a single leap, its movement so unnatural that peasants swore it could fly. The attacks covered a sprawling area of nearly 5,000 square kilometers. Villagers were ripped apart while tending fields or walking forest paths. The creature didn't just kill, it devoured, often going straight for the throat and leaving behind shredded remains. The panic grew so intense that the King of France himself intervened, dispatching elite huntsmen, soldiers, and nobles to end the bloodshed. For years, the region was flooded with armed search parties, baited traps, and blood-soaked speculation. More than 200 attacks were reported. Over 100 people, many of them children, were killed. Some accounts suggest nearly 100 victims were partially eaten. Survivors, though rare, were often permanently maimed. Theories bloomed like weeds. A monstrous wolf, a lion escaped from a traveling menagerie, a hyena brought back from Africa by French explorers. Some whispered darker things, that it was a punishment sent by God, or a supernatural creature summoned by a cursed land. Several animals were killed and paraded through towns as the beast. But the killings continued. And then, just as suddenly as it had come, the beast vanished. No definitive creature was ever identified. No killer definitively captured. The fields fell silent again, but the fear remained. To this day, the identity of the beast of Gévaudan is unsolved. But in the forests of Lozère and Haute-Loire, the story lives on, passed down like a warning to each new generation.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Fireside Unsolved. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe to help the channel grow. Until next time, take it easy and be easy, you filthy bastards.